Welcome to another episode of the MMA Lockcast. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and as always, the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, ensuring you leave no stone unturned for these upcoming MMA events. We cover over 17 different promotions from all over the world, where we've recently also surpassed 4,500 fighter profiles for you to browse through and ensure you got as many direct links to past fights for all of these fighters, so you can predict, break down, analyze, coach, or if you're a fighter or if you're a commentator, and ensure you know as much about these fighters as possible before they step foot in the cage. And you can probably make a prediction as best as you can by ensuring you got everything you need on one page with the MMA Fight Archive. There's a 7-day free trial, and we are close to surpassing 100 subscribers on this service. So I greatly appreciate everybody that's already done so as well. Shout out to everybody that's already hopped on recently for a free trial. Get your opportunity to do that as well by clicking the link in the description below. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive, the largest library of its kind in the world. Check it out. Again, 7-day free trial. Link in the description below. All right, we are going to be breaking down UFC Vegas 99 this weekend, headlined by a middleweight matchup between Anthony Fluffy Hernandez taking on Michel Pereira. Both these guys are streaking at this moment in time, so it is a great time to put these guys together with two clashes of styles here in terms of the grapple-heavy and aggressive, relentless approach of Anthony Hernandez, and then obviously the explosive finishing style of Michel Pereira. Very fun fight there. Co-main event also features a very fun matchup here between, where is it again? Rob Font and Kyler Phillips. So kind of a passing of the torch type of fight, if you want to call it that, with Rob Font on a little bit of a rough run, 1-4 in his last 5 fights. Kyler Phillips on a bit of a winning streak right now, finally has his feet under him. Let's see who's able to continue to advance up the bantamweight rankings. All right, let's quickly recap this past weekend's UFC card in terms of the lock of the night and dog of the night plays. The lock of the night comes through for us in the first fight of the night, and it was a dominant performance by Clayton Carpenter as he comes through as a -200 favorite, getting the job done, putting Lucas Hocha through the ringer, and then eventually finding a submission in the second round. Beautiful work there, and that's what a lock of the night is supposed to look like. -200 may be a little bit too chalky for some people, but when it looks that dominant, who wouldn't want to get a 50% ROI off of a bet? When it looks that easy, that's the whole point of the lock of the night play. Sometimes it will be better than those types of prices, but the target is getting as high percentage of hits as possible. Again, this year, not the greatest performance compared to last year. So right now, with the Clayton Carpenter win, that brings our lock of the night record to 73-36 for a 67% hit rate. Again, we're in the profit. But I would definitely like to be further along, and we got about 2.5 months left of action to go. I'm sure we can get closer to that goal by the end of it. Dog of the night, Nico Price. Boy, was I off here. I had a lot of people berating me for actually picking Nico Price in the spot, and I was very underwhelmed with his performance. I knew that first round would be a tough one, but in the second and third rounds is where I expected Price to have the better gas tank, which to me it looked like near the ending of the second round. But somehow Garimbo was able to get the takedowns in the beginning of the third round and just keep Nico Price on his back. And it was not a good pick in hindsight. So I'll take that one on the chin. Very unfortunate that I was unable to cash that ticket there. Our OKTAGON dog of the night did hit. I can't remember it off the top of my head, but we go 1-1 on the weekend for dog of the night plays. I did not have a lock of the night play for the OKTAGON just because I just wasn't overly confident. Even though we profited on that event, wasn't overly confident in that spot. But otherwise, that brings our dog of the night record now to 41-72 on the year for 36% hit rate, getting closer to that black mark, closer to that green mark. Again, tumultuous run to start off the year, but we're getting closer and closer to breaking even there. Hopefully we can turn around here in the last 2.5 months of the year. Quick a plug for the MMALOTN Patreon page, where I'll be breaking down a total of 4 events this weekend. We got LFA 194 going down on Friday. Then we have KSW 99 going down on Saturday, right alongside PFL Super Fights going down on Saturday as well. I'll be breaking down all of those fights and cards on the MMALOTN Patreon Patreon page. You can find that link in the description below. Not just breakdowns, but a ton of other fun and great content to help you make some fun bets or some serious bets. Completely up to you. I have you covered on the MMALOTN Patreon page. And don't fret, I will be breaking down the PFL card for you guys here on the MMALOTN Patreon page, either Thursday or Friday. That should drop. I'm hoping for Thursday, but it really depends on my timing and if I'm able to get the researching done in a timely fashion. So don't fret about that. And then lastly, shout out to the guys over there at GodzillaWins.com, providing your boy a platform to drop written breakdowns to the public for free. On Thursdays, we drop the main event breakdowns, and then on Fridays, we drop the top 3 money line spots. So if you want to check that out, that is at GodzillaWins.com. And not only do they have you covered for MMA, which is what I pretty much run over there, but all other team sports. NFL is in full swing again. Hockey and basketball just about to pick up as well. Check it out, GodzillaWins.com. All right, we got 11 fights to break down for this UFC Vegas 99 card. So without further ado, let's get right into this bad boy. First fight of the night. Heavyweights throwing down here as we have Austin Lane coming in at plus 280, going up against Robelis Despaigne coming in at minus 355. Now, we'll start off on the Austin Lane side of things, who's 0-2 in his last 2 fights, getting knocked out in both of those matchups. Justin Tafa was able to knock him out in the first round, and then Jonathan Dinez was able to knock him out in the second round, but we did see some solid grappling from Lane in the opening minutes of that Dinez fight that allowed him to control that first round for, I believe it was 4 minutes out of the 5 minutes of that first round, but in the second round, he was unable to get to it, eventually leaving that knockout opportunity for Dinez, allowing him to get the knockout there. 36 years old, Austin Lane doesn't really have too much to offer. He's a big, intimidating opponent. He's strong, but he lacks a little bit of speed and he lacks a little bit of power, which ultimately puts him in trouble against guys that are able to stop his style, stop his slow burn, and then eventually get him out of there as well. And I think that's what we might end up seeing here with Robelis Despaigne. Robelis, unfortunately, dropped his UFC debut earlier this year, where he came up short against Waldo Cortez Acosta, who was able to control him for 10 out of 15 minutes of that matchup. But we know what Despaigne is all about. 6'7", Taekwondo specialist. I believe it was 2012, the year that he actually competed in the Olympics. His last 4 wins have all come within 18 seconds. The guy's quick. He's fast. One of the faster guys we've ever seen at heavyweight, especially with the power that he's able to produce, and that's usually his calling card. But we saw when guys are able to drag him to the ground, slow him down, it's going to be much harder for him to get finishes in the second and third rounds when he doesn't have that speed and power to lean on as he did earlier on in the fight. So in this one, you'd be crazy to play Despaigne at minus 255. I think just honing in on that round 1 KO is probably the best way to go about it with him. Lane does have an opportunity to wrap him up almost immediately like he did against Dinez, get this fight to the ground and just grind him out. I'm still going to lean Despaigne as my prediction. I might end up getting to the betting window on Austin Lane should the line widen a little bit more. But again, we know it. If Despaigne can't get the finish within a minute or so, things are going to go sour for him very quickly, and Lane is more than capable of doing that to him here. But prediction will be Despaigne round 1 knockout, but keep an eye on that Lane line because it might get to a point where you're forced to bet it considering the odds. All right, next up, women's strawweight matchup here as we have Melissa Martinez coming in at minus 115, going up against Elise Ardelean coming in at minus 105. Now, it's been over 2 years since we've seen Melissa Martinez in action, and she's been dealing with a lot of injuries and been unable to compete, but for some reason, she's able to take this fight on somewhat short notice, stepping in for an injured opponent. I can't remember who it was off the top of my head. I believe it's High and Amanda, actually. But Martinez dropped her UFC debut 2 years ago at UFC 279 when she came up short against Elise Reed. She had a solid second round where she was getting some good damage off in the clinch and from range, but in the third round she ended up getting taken down a little bit and grinded from that top position by the striker in Elise Reed, who is normally very much allergic to the grappling realm. So to see her have grappling success against Martinez is not a good look at all for the 27-year-old Mexican fighter. Melissa's brother, actually, David Martinez, earned his contract with the Contender Penne streaks just a couple weeks ago, and I'm sure that will help buoy her coming into her second UFC matchup, hoping that she can go out there and be successful and follow in the footsteps of her brother. She is a kickboxer by trade, utilizes a lot of movement, and likes to kick from distance, but I do have some question marks about her level of competition, or at least her ability to be successful in the UFC. Luckily for her, she's going up against a very low-level fighter as well here in Elise Ardelean, who came up short against Sean Bannon in a fight that was much closer than people expected back in July. Ardelean was able to get some control time in the first and second round, and I thought she did enough to win the second round. I thought Bannon did enough in the first round to outweigh the control and top pressure of Ardelean, and then in the third round, we saw Ardelean have no success in terms of trying to close the distance and get back to her wrestling, which worked so well for her in the second round, allowing Bannon to just bust her up and tread at distance and win that fight on the scorecards. Ardelean, 9-6 overall MMA record here. Didn't really understand the signing to the UFC. You know, she has a large social media following. She posts a lot of comedic stuff, a lot of sexual stuff, as you would expect. But you know, I was a little bit more impressed with her in that fight against Bannon than I was in the tape that I had leading up to this matchup. Not to mention the very low level of competition she was beating during that 5 or 6 fight winning streak that she had coming into the UFC. This is a tough one to call. You know, both women leave a lot to be desired. Obviously, Martinez, the better striker here, but I think Ardelean is strong enough to get this into the grappling and clinch realm where Martinez will likely struggle. If Ardelean is able to use her bullying tactics to get Martinez to the ground, she will more than likely be able to out-wrestle her and keep her on the mat and at least win 2 rounds in this matchup to get her hand raised on the scorecards. Am I willing to bet on this fight between 2 very low-level fighters and a fighter that got out-grappled by Elise Reed? No, but in terms of a prediction, Ardelean is not a bad underdog shot to take in the second fight of the night, as long as she can get to her grappling and try to get Martinez to wear her out, and win this fight on the scorecards. All right. Back-to-back strawweight matchups here, as now we have Jessica Penne coming in at plus 150, going up against the aforementioned Elise Reed, who comes in at minus 175. Now we'll start off on the Jessica Penne side, who has found it very difficult to stay active in recent years. Obviously, from 2017 to 2021, she was sitting on the sidelines due to a failed drug test. And then when she came back in 2021, between 2021 and 2023, she was able to rattle off 4 fights, but she has now been out of the cage for over a year and a half, and she was only a few months away from her 42nd birthday. This former atomweight champion used to utilize her BJJ specialty to mass effect, as she was able to do a great job in terms of getting opponents to the ground, finding those submission opportunities, and getting her opponents out of there. She was able to get the submission wins over Karolina Kovacevic and a decision victory over Lupita Godinez in her return bout from that 2017 hiatus. But that was a split decision, and that was a greasy decision considering her ability to get those positions to control Godinez and then end up winning that fight on the scorecards. Penne, her striking is very lackluster. She has a ton of experience, has some good training partners. I believe her best friend is Angela Hill. So she's obviously been working on her striking, but it's clearly not to the point that's going to find her any success in the UFC. It's all about getting fights to the ground and looking for submissions to try to get her opponents out of there. Her opponent, Elise Reed, has been doing nothing but alternating wins and losses through her 7 UFC matchups, most recently coming up short against Lupita Godinez in a fight that she got absolutely mauled in and eventually submitted in the second round of their matchup. Elise Reed is a Taekwondo specialist who normally utilizes a blitzing style, crashing the pocket with a few big strikes and then angling off and getting back out into distance, where she's able to maintain her distance well and do a good job in terms of keeping opponents at bay. Where she has struggled throughout her career has been on the ground, and that's where fighters like Sam Hughes, Loma Lookboonmee, and Lupita Godinez have been able to get her to the ground and finish her. Even Sajara Eubanks in her UFC debut. But Reed, she's physical, she's strong, she's shown some glimpses of success against grapplers like she did against Jin Fry, but I do believe that was a matchup where she was just the bigger fighter there, the stronger fighter, and she was able to nullify most of Fry's grappling attempts in that matchup. Reed, fun striker, but the holes that she leaves in the grappling game is just too much for me to ignore in this matchup. I will pick her to win this fight because she is closer to her prime. She's been a little bit more active, or at least more active in recent years than Penne has been. And if she is successful in keeping this fight upright, she probably could end up looking like the minus 300, minus 400 favorite. But Penne may only need a takedown or a back take or two for her to be able to find a position where she could get a submission, because I believe she is that much better of a BJJ specialist than Reed. And that's where I have my conflict in terms of having too much confidence on either side. I am going to lean Reed by decision, very, very low confidence, but I may end up taking a shot on Penne by submission at anything better than plus 500. I think that has some value, as that's probably the only way that Penne wins this matchup. And all of Elise Reed's losses have come by finish, and with those fights finishing on the ground. Penne's wrestling not the greatest, but she could finagle her way into a grappling sequence that could end up with her latching onto a submission and getting the tap here. So give me give me Reed by decision, but the only thing I would bet would be Penne by submission. But again, very low percentage outcome for that to actually happen. All right, the third straight women's bout that we have here actually goes down in the bantamweight division, as we have Jocelyn Edwards coming in at minus 260, going up against Tamiris Vidal, who comes in at plus 220. Now we'll start off on the Edwards side of things, who's on a 2-fight losing streak, losing to Nora Cornell back at UFC Paris in 2023, and then coming up short against Eileen Perez in a grudge match earlier this year, in a fight where she had some glimpses of success with pulling off reversals and getting some good top time of her own, but ultimately is Eileen Perez who was able to get most of the control time and land the good enough damage that their judges ended up scoring the fight in her favor. Edwards has some decent work off of her back if she's able to provide, or at least get the space that she needs to throw up submissions or at least pull off reversals, but I think she is best when she's able to glide around the cage and utilize her kicking game to keep opponents at bay and just rinse and repeat that. It may not be the most entertaining and it may not be super action-packed, but she's utilized that style very effectively against a lot of opponents, and fighters usually have an issue trying to close that distance and get their own game going. Her opponent this weekend, Tamiris Vidal, is on a 2-fight losing streak as well, but last time around lost via boot punch to Melissa Gatto in a matchup where she was getting absolutely dominated on the mat for about 2 rounds before Gatto was able to finish her in the 3rd round. Vidal, fall from grace, as a lot of people were very impressed with her coming into the UFC. Obviously, she had that flying knee to the body against Ramona Pascual, where she was able to get the win there, and then she came in as a massive favorite against Montserrat Rendon and very much underperformed there. She was struggling to deal with Rendon, and then she struggled even more to deal with Gatto. I think people are finally starting to see that Vidal is a little bit more hype than anything. She's a slugger that loves to exchange in the pocket, throw wide winging hooks. If she feels she has a grappling advantage over opponents, she'll look to take them to the ground and grind them out from there. But I'm not impressed by her cardio. I'm not impressed by her grappling defense. Her striking, again, it's more power than anything, and I think more disciplined and technical fighters should be able to get the better of her. Now, it's kind of weird to see Jocelyn Edwards as such a big favorite in this spot, but she should have all the advantages in this matchup, and I think she has good enough footwork and range management that she should be able to stay away from the slugging style of Vidal in this fight. But one style that I would love to see from Edwards that I think could be very effective for her here is to go out there and try to grapple Vidal. Look to take this to the ground and try to use her BJJ advantage to a point that she could find a submission to get this fight out of there. Something to note, Jocelyn Edwards was a big part of the training camp for Valentina Shevchenko leading up to her last matchup against Alexa Grasso in a fight where we know that the main go-to for Shevchenko was to get the fight to the ground and grind her opponent out from that top position. Maybe Edwards was able to pick up a thing or two during that training camp that could allow her to be successful in this matchup against Tamiris Vidal. So minus 260, not a line that I really want to get involved with here with Edwards. But I'm intrigued by her submission prop, which I think I saw around at plus 1,000. We'll probably take a little bit of a shot on that if she is able to go out there and implement that type of approach. I think that'll be the best way to wear Vidal down and then take advantage of some of her aggro habits, where I think Edwards is just a little bit more effective in terms of just being more disciplined and more technical. So I'm going to go Edwards here. My conspiracy theory play of the week is going to be Jocelyn Edwards by submission, so I'll definitely be taking a poke on that, but she should win this fight no matter where it ends up taking place. All right, very fun fight here in the men's bantamweight division as we have Brad Katona coming in at plus 200 going up against one of my favorite prospects on the roster, Gene Matsumoto, who comes in at minus 235. Now, Brad Katona is coming off of a dominant victory over Jesse Butler in a matchup where he utilizes grapple-heavy approach to the first 2 rounds, then decided to strike with Butler for about half a round in the 3rd round. But then Butler slipped, fell to his back, and Katona took full advantage and stayed on top of him for the last 2 minutes of that round to end up winning that fight pretty decisively. I believe that fight was back in June. That's on the back end of a loss to Garrett Armfield that he suffered at the beginning of the year, which is only the 3rd loss in the 17 fight career of Brad Katona. And that was a fight where I think it was very close, but Katona just missed on a couple cues that I felt like could have allowed him to get the better of at least one of those first 2 rounds, which is what the judges scored in Armfield's favor. Katona is normally a guy with a very good fight IQ, good intelligence, good game planning, and good execution of it. And he does a good job in terms of mixing his striking to open up his grapple-heavy approach, which will usually be very effective for him for fighters that are not able to get up from under him. He has a great gas tank, and he has a good idea of where he's normally at in fights. Again, the Armfield one, I'm going to chalk up more to an anomaly than anything, but I do think that this guy is still a very capable and educated fighter, and it's going to be tough to fade, especially as a big favorite or big underdog here. He goes up against Gene Matsumoto, who had a successful UFC debut earlier this year where he was able to submit Dan Argueta. That was a matchup where he actually found himself down on the scorecards going into that 2nd round, and it seemed he might have been down going into the 3rd round, but we kept the judges out of it as Matsumoto was able to clamp on to a guillotine against Argueta and put him out with about 1 second left on the clock in the 2nd round. Matsumoto is a guy that normally relies on his striking-heavy approach to walk his opponents down, stamp those combinations with leg kicks, and really wear them down until he can find either a finish or just able to beat them on the scorecards with that. It seems like the one issue that he has throughout his career is that takedown defense, which is where guys like Casey Tanner and Dan Argueta have gotten the better of him. But he does show a good bit of urgency in terms of getting his feet on the hips of his opponents and either throwing up submissions or looking to push off and get back to the feet where he ends up having an advantage over his opponents. But as he continues to work through the UFC and fight tougher opponents each time, it's going to get harder for him to continue to rely on that ability to work back to his feet for him to win fights, especially if they end up going to the scorecards. Now, I do believe he is the better striker here against Katona, and I do think his defensive grappling should be good enough to nullify the amount of control time that Katona gets from that top position. However, I still believe that the line is a little bit too wide here. I believe Matsumoto should be closer to 60, maybe 65%, meaning he should be anywhere between minus 150 and minus 185, yet we see him at minus 235 in this matchup. I have been a big fan of Katona and his process throughout his fights, which makes me want to warrant at least a little bit of an underdog shot on him here. With that said, though, I do believe that Matsumoto is going to be more effective with landing damage throughout this matchup, and we have seen good enough defensive grappling for him to at least, be the one that should be favored in this fight. So I will predict him to win, but at this line with plus 200 on Brad Katona, I feel like I need to take a little bit of a shot on him here, at least for odds sake, because of his ability to make this fight a lot closer than the odds suggest. He just needs to get that grappling going, nullify the striking of Matsumoto, which is a tough task in itself, but if there's anybody capable at this level, Katona should be able to get off on some of that success and make this a lot closer and maybe pull off a decision victory here. So I'm going to go I'm going to go Matsumoto and Matsumoto by decision. But a small underdog shot is definitely warranted on a guy like Brad Katona. All right, next up, flyweight matchup here as we have Matthias Nicolau coming in at plus 160 going up against Asu Almabayev, who comes in at minus 185. Now, the veteran Matthias Nicolau is riding his first 2-fight losing streak of his career and unfortunately has been finished in both of those matchups. The first of those 2 was a knockout loss to Brandon Royval, followed up by a knockout loss to Alex Perez from earlier this year. Something that both those opponents had in common was their perpetual motion, especially laterally, that seemed to cause Nicolau a lot of problems, especially when they eventually would close the distance and get off on their combinations. Nicolau is a BJJ black belt who actually prefers the striking more than anything, which is why we don't often see him seeking the takedowns. It's often that we see him utilizing his grappling defensively so he can keep fights in the striking realm, where he does a good job in terms of putting combinations together, landing nasty head kicks, and having good success there. However, it seems as he's been fighting the top guys of the division, it's been getting harder for him to find that groove in the striking realm, which has led to him obviously getting finished in his last 2 fights. He's still only 31 years old, still capable of making changes and improvements in his game. But he's going up against a very tough fighter here in Almabayev. Firstly, hats off to Nicolau for accepting a guy as dangerous as Almabayev coming into a fight that could potentially be his 3rd straight loss and maybe even a pink slip outside of the UFC. But again, Almabayev, this guy, 30 years old, on a tremendous winning streak right now as well, has won 3 straight fights in the UFC, finishing Ode Osborne in his first fight, had a ton of finishing opportunities against guys like CJ Vergara and Jose Johnson, but was unable to get them out of there. But his wrestling has been nothing short of amazing, as we've been seeing him just continuously taking down his opponents and controlling them. He's accrued 26 minutes of control time through the 38 minutes of cage time he's actually been in there. He has completed 15 total takedowns through his last 2 matchups between Vergara and Johnson, and he does a great job in terms of timing his takedowns and chaining his attempts together. When he can't hold opponents down, he does a good job in terms of riding their back up against the cage, staying close to them and stuck to them like glue until he can eventually find that trip or takedown that he needs to assert that dominant position from on top. He's very disciplined and very good with his submission defense, as we saw him put in some bad positions against Jose Johnson and work out of them, which ultimately led to him getting back to a dominant position and then getting back to doing work from that spot. In this matchup, Nicolau might be a little bit more of a dangerous BJJ specialist than Jose Johnson, obviously a much more dangerous striker as well, but I do believe in Almabayev's ability to control the distance here and control the pace until he can eventually open up those takedown opportunities where he should be able to hold Nicolau on the mat. Maybe not as long as he was able to do against guys like Vergara and Johnson, but I think that his ability to continuously mix it up and get that control time, land the damage in those positions as well, should be enough for him to go out there and grind out Nicolau. I'm a big believer in Almabayev, and I have seen some people try to talk him down, try to discredit the run that he's on right now and discredit his skill level. I'm not of that belief. You might be able to say that again for a guy like Azat Maxim, who ended up losing to Charles Johnson a couple of fights back. But I do think that Almabayev is the truth, and I do think that he'll win this fight. This is a big fight for him too. Fighting a guy that's just coming off of a main event fight, this will definitely position him amongst the top 5 of the flyweights and probably have him knocking on the door of a title shot in 2025. But I'll go Almabayev by decision. Probably a coming out party for him as well, considering the level of opponent that he's facing there. All right, next up, featherweight matchup here, as we have Darren Elkins coming in at -115, going up against Daniel Pineda, who comes in at -105. Now, both these guys are clearly past their prime, but Elkins continues to show that he can still be a very competitive fighter and somebody that's very hard to deal with. Last time around, he was able to get a submission victory over TJ Brown in a fight that he pretty much dominated the entire time with his grappling, his relentlessness, and his cardio edge, which eventually broke TJ Brown and got him the submission victory. The Jonathan Pierce fight, very tough fight for him there, as obviously Pierce very strong and difficult to deal with. But again, exchanging wins and losses recently shows that Elkins could still have some success in the UFC as long as they don't give him these ranked killers that can go out there and just completely shut him down or even knock him out as he has been in the past. More often than not, his durability does hold up, which allows him to fight deeper into matchups, break his opponents, and eventually finish them late, or just control them for 15 minutes and end up winning that way as well. He's 40 years old. He goes up against another guy in Daniel Pineda, who's 39. He's on the doorstep of 40 years old as well, and he's a guy that's also on a 2-fight losing streak himself. He got rocked multiple times by Alex Caceres and Nathaniel Wood, but still managed to see the scorecards in those matchups, and he's a guy that normally likes to take a grapple-heavy approach and be very aggressive with it by trying to finish his opponents pretty early. I believe all of his 28 wins have come inside the distance, which goes further to prove that he's not really a decision-friendly fighter or a guy that does enough work to win decisions, considering how much control time and damage he ends up eating should fights end up going to the full 15 minutes. This is a matchup that I could see be competitive early with both guys having some grappling success, but I believe the relentlessness and defense of Elkins in the grappling and scrambling positions will cause Pineda a ton of trouble. And once Elkins starts to smell and pick up on the fact that Pineda is slowing down, something that we often see throughout his fights, he will start to turn on the gas, and that will likely lead to him finding a finish here, whether it's by submission or by TKO. I think that the 40-year-old Elkins is more than capable of defeating a guy like Pineda, who is finish or bust, especially early on in matchups. This will be dangerous early, so if you want to hedge with Pineda round one, I don't blame you, but I do think that this is a matchup where we'll see a classic Elkins performance that leads to him getting a finish in the second or third round. And I also believe that's why he has flipped from being a slight underdog now to an even money favorite. Or, again, both guys are even money, but he's slightly the favorite now at minus 115. All right, next up, bantamweight matchup here as we have Jake Hadley taking on UFC debutant and short notice replacement Cameron Smotherman. Now, originally, Jake Hadley was supposed to take on Brady Heaston, but Heaston pulled out on Tuesday of fight week, and in steps Cameron Smotherman, who's trying to do some wild things, but I'll talk about that very shortly. We'll first talk about Jake Hadley, who was able to snap a 2-fight losing streak last time around by pretty much piecing up Colin Lorraine through 15 minutes of their matchup, stuffing 7 of Lorraine's 8 takedown attempts, and showcasing that Hadley has a very educated striking game, especially when he has a clear advantage over his opponents. And we know that he had that here against Colin Lorraine, or when he fought him, I believe that was back in July. That was on the back end of 2 decision losses to guys like Charles Johnson, who were able to put out the numbers on Hadley, and Hadley had no answer for that. And then Cody Durden, who was able to just rinse and repeat with the takedowns and the pressure to end up getting the win there. Hadley came into the UFC with a ton of hype, a ton of, a lot of people are eagerly awaiting for him to get to this level to showcase that he belongs amongst the best flyweights in the world, but it didn't really work out for him, like I said, in that 2-fight losing streak that he had. Now up at 135 pounds, which he actually took last time around on short notice. With him coming out victorious, maybe he feels like he should be a bantamweight, as it's not really taking too much away from his performances anymore, having to make 125 pounds, which is a weight class that he was just too big for, in my opinion. We've seen guys like Gilbert Burns do that in the past, going from lightweight to welterweight and having way more success at the higher weight class, which inevitably saw Gilbert Burns earn a UFC title shot. I'm not saying Jake Hadley's going to get to that point, considering how stacked the bantamweight division is, but it could have some positive impact in his career going up this weight class and not having to drain himself making 125 pounds. Usually a very solid smothering grappler who does a great job in terms of holding his opponents down and finding submission opportunities, but to see the improvements in his striking game like we saw last time around should give him that confidence going into other fights that he doesn't have to lean on just desperation takedowns to try to get his wins. Now he's taking on short notice replacement Cameron Smotherman, who's on a 3-fight winning streak, but had lost on his Dana White Contender Series opportunity last year, where he got knocked out by Christos Grigoriou in 1 minute. Smotherman, a guy from the Fury FC scene that I haven't been overly impressed with. And even during this 3-fight winning streak that he's currently on, he defeated Mando Gutierrez, who's a former Ultimate Fighter and Contender Series competitor. That was a fight that Gutierrez won pretty much 10 minutes of with his grappling alone, showcasing that Smotherman still has that issue in his game, but Smotherman had the better cardio and wore down Gutierrez in the 3rd round, leading to a finish there to get that win. He followed it up with a split decision win over Ryan Cuse, who also had a lot of grappling success there, but Smotherman just edged him out with landing a little bit more damage, and then he was able to get the submission victory in his last matchup against a 4-6 opponent. Now Smotherman, like I said, taking this on short notice, took this fight on, I believe, Monday or Tuesday of fight week, and he was actually in Saudi Arabia. He was in Abu Dhabi, I should say. It was either Abu Dhabi, wherever the PFL card is taking place. I want to say Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. So probably Saudi Arabia. Anyway, yeah, he was there cornering or looking to corner his teammate Rafael Stotts, who fights on the PFL card this weekend. But now he's flying back across the world and hoping to make 135 pounds as well, especially, very weird considering he's not been in training camp or anything. Maybe he's been training, but not with a date in mind. So you have to wonder how much he's going to have to kill himself to try to make 135 pounds while traveling across the world and taking this on short notice the way that he is. Normally, he's a slick boxer, good striking, good hands, good hand speed, decent cardio. But the hole in his game has been the grappling, and that's where I think that Hadley should be able to take advantage of him. Look for Hadley to find well-timed takedowns, smother him, no pun intended, up against the cage, looking to take the back, and eventually I think that will lead to a submission victory for Jake Hadley. As of this recording, there are no odds on this matchup, but I'm expecting Hadley to be a chalky favorite here. I'm assuming maybe minus 250, minus 300. But I'll be looking to take advantage of the Hadley submission prop if it's anything better than, plus 200, plus 300, because I do think he has that much of an advantage on the mat. And then mixing all the other circumstances for Smotherman, the bad weight cut that he'll likely have coming into this, the super abbreviated training camp, not even a training camp. You just accepted this fight and you're jumping right into the fight. And this is a bad stylistic matchup for him as well. So look for a classic Jake Hadley performance here with the grappling, with the smothering, and a possible submission victory. All right, flyweights going at it now with Charles Johnson coming in at minus 225, going up against Sumudaerji, who comes in at plus 190. Now, it's fantastic to see Charles Johnson in such a rhythm now, as he had a 3-fight losing streak in 2023, and now in 2024, he's won 3 straight victories, most recently knocking out Joshua Van, giving Joshua Van the first loss of his UFC career. Charles Johnson is a guy that used to be a slow starter, but has done a great job in terms of asserting himself from jump. Now he utilizes his volume and confidence in the striking realm to touch up his opponents, wear them down, and just batter them over 15 minutes to win on the scorecards. His urgency in his defensive grappling is very much improved compared to the 3-fight losing streak that we saw him on, because that used to be the issue in his game, was that he just didn't have the urgency in working out of those spots, but now he does, which allows him to get back to his striking heavy approach more often, and that allows him to land damage, not often getting knockouts like he did in the Joshua Van fight, but still landing enough damage that the judges ultimately see fights in his favor. I'm glad to see him tapping into that potential that he had when he was on the LFA roster. I believe he was the former LFA flyweight champion as well. Very, very solid fighter, and I'm glad that he is now fighting to the best of his capabilities. He goes up against Sumudaerji here, who's on a 2-fight losing streak, being submitted in both of his matchups, but now comes in against a striker in Charles Johnson. Sumudaerji is also a striker who likes to utilize his pinpoint striking with power to hurt his opponents or put them away. What his issue has been in the past is grapple heavy fighters, but also guys that are usually able to set a pace against him. And I think the issue he's going to have going into this fight against Charles Johnson is keeping up with the pace of Johnson. Unless Sumudaerji hurts him repeatedly or finishes him, I think he's going to struggle keeping up with the pace and volume and footwork of a guy like Johnson, and especially the speed advantage that Johnson holds here. I think he's really going to frustrate Sumudaerji, which will cause Sumudaerji to slow down later on in this matchup, allowing Johnson to touch him up and pretty much cruise to a decision victory. It wouldn't surprise me if Johnson eventually gets a finish later on, should Sumudaerji slow down a whole lot. But I do think that Sumudaerji is in for some trouble here. I think Charles Johnson has him beat pretty much everywhere. Sumudaerji is not much of a grapple-heavy fighter. I think he'll struggle to try to implement that here if that's what he chooses to do. And then, again, Johnson's cardio edge and pretty much edge everywhere in this fight should allow him to go out there and get a pretty easy victory. I'll look for the round 3 prop probably, but Johnson, again, not a big finisher outside of that Joshua Van knockout recently, but he should win this fight, and I think he's more than worthy of the chalk. All right, co-main event, bantamweight matchup here, as we have veteran Rob Font coming in at plus 325, going up against rising contender Kyler Phillips, who comes in at minus 450. Now we'll start off on the Rob Font side of things, who's 1-4 in his last 5 fights. That one victory coming against another rising contender, and Adrian Yanez, who's kind of fallen to the wayside in recent fights. But he is coming off of losses to Corey Sandhagen in a fight that he got completely out-grappled in. And then the Davison-Figueiredo fight, where it was a mixture of big shots landed by Figueiredo and some takedowns that led to Font losing another fight. This 37-year-old bantamweight is just not close to achieving the success many people believe he had earlier on in his career. He's starting to slow down. And even though he usually gets the better of his opponents in terms of volume and output. It's the lack of sting and power and significant damage that he's inflicting on his opponents that allows his opponents to get the better of him, or at least still beat him by landing half the shots that they normally land on him. I believe it was the Marlon Vera fight where he landed more than double of the shots that Vera landed, but Vera still won the decision because Vera was clearly landing with much more impact and landed a few knockdowns in that fight as well. Font has some slick BJJ if he's able to get that front lock series going, or that front choke series going, but we have seen him get grinded out by stronger wrestlers as well, and that's a little bit of an issue that you need to worry about. Going up against Kyler Phillips here, who's on a 3-fight winning streak, that's on the back end of that unfortunate split decision loss that he had to Hadley and Paiva. If you guys remember, that was a matchup where he was nearly finishing Paiva in the first round and seemed to empty the kitchen sink on him, but was unable to get Paiva out there, and then Paiva was able to rally back in the second and third rounds, and even though the fight probably should have ended up being a draw, the two judges at least saw that fight in Paiva's favor, giving Phillips that loss that a lot of people don't think that he should have gotten. Regardless, he bounced back with a submission victory over Marcelo Rojo, an educated victory over Hani Barcelos, and a very solid fight IQ approach against Pedro Munoz, who we knew he had a complete advantage over. And that was a fight where we saw a different approach from Pedro Munoz. Pedro is a guy, BJJ black belt, who would normally utilize a pressure striking style to try to knock his opponents out and only uses grappling defensively. But we did see Phillips manage to stop the majority of his takedowns, keep the fight in the striking realm, where he held a physicality and speed advantage, which ended up leading to him winning that matchup. Phillips, very flashy striker, but it's his speed and power that he's able to land with, or I should say stinging power that he's able to land with, that causes a lot of opponents' issues. But he also has some slick ground game and groundwork. It's just been his ability to manage his gas tank, which he needs to continue to hone in on if he hopes to be successful at the higher levels. Now, Font can make this fight competitive with the output and volume that he brings, but I still think that we're going to see Phillips do a good enough job in terms of landing the more damaging blows, landing the more optically pleasing blows to the judges. But I also wouldn't be surprised if we see Phillips looks to take this fight to the ground so that he can control the pace and keep Rob Font on his back. My only issue, and why I'll likely never bet Phillips at chalk, is that sketchy gas tank, especially against a guy here in Rob Font who could potentially push the pace to take advantage of that. With that said, Phillips has shown an elite ability to be very successful through the first 2 rounds of most fights. So I don't want to fade him in this matchup, especially against somebody on a rough slump the way that Rob Font is. So I'm still going to pick Phillips to win by decision, but I'm going to pass on the heavy chalk in this fight. All right, that brings us to our main event. Anthony Fluffy Hernandez coming in at -135 in this middleweight clash, going up against Michel Pereira, who comes in at +115. Now, we'll start off on the Anthony Hernandez side of things, who's on a 5-fight winning streak, finishing all of his opponents with the exception of one of them in Josh Friend, but that was a fight that he had so many close submission attempts but was unable to get the job done. This winning streak started with that unbelievable victory that he had over Rodolfo Vieira, submitting Vieira after surviving the early grappling onslaught of the BJJ Wizard, and then pulling off a submission of his own after Vieira was completely gassed, and Hernandez found the perfect opportunity to find that submission. Hernandez, I have long said, is the poor man's version of Cain Velasquez, but he is stripping that poor man's part of the moniker with the performance that he's been having as of late. And for my, UFC viewers of old, guys that do remember Cain Velasquez's style, you remember that he used to just love taking guys down, letting them eventually work back to the feet, only to take them down once again, similar to a Merab Dvalishvili, but just not as much output or not as much cardio. That's what Hernandez does, man. This guy sets such a high pace that he just breaks his opponents and eventually opens up submission opportunities, or at least abilities for him to just wear his opponents down and beat them on the scorecards. He has a tremendous gas tank. I'm very happy to see him in a 25-minute fight, something that he actually defeated Brendan Allen in back in their LFA days back in the day. But I'm glad at 31 years old that Hernandez is starting to become a little bit more active now and getting this main event slot, because this guy is somebody that a lot of middleweights should worry about, especially if he can keep his durability in check. The 2 fights that he had a little bit of a fumble in or a road bump in, win was when he fought Marcus Perez and Kevin Holland, both fights where he got hurt to the body and then eventually finished right after that. But he's been facing some pretty heavy hitters as of late and done a good job in terms of keeping his durability about him and then eventually wearing his opponents out, breaking them, and finding the finish. I love his style, and as long as we can continue to trust that his durability is going to hold strong, he's going to be a problem. He will be in the top 5 in no time, especially if he's able to get a dominant victory here over a guy that's streaking, as much as we've seen Pereira streak recently. He's 31. So Pereira, moving to middleweight within his last few fights, absolutely dominating his opponents, beating guys like Andre Petrosky, Michał Oleksiejczuk, and Ihor Portieria, finishing all 3 of those opponents in the first round. He's riding a tremendous winning streak as well. We know what he's all about. Fast, explosive, big power early on in his matchups. And it's been interesting to see him seek the submission after hurting his opponents rather than just looking to empty his gas tank and get them out by TKO. He was able to submit Ihor Portieria, and he was also able to submit Oleksiejczuk. Very, very impressive there, showing the maturity and growth in the 31-year-old's game, especially coming into his 43rd professional MMA fight here. I think he didn't do the most of his maturing until he got into the UFC, showcasing the level of opponents that he's been going up against and how much better that he can actually be. But I still believe that this guy is a finish or bust fighter at this level, right? Like he did beat Andre Fialho by decision. He did beat Santiago Ponzinibbio by decision, but fighting guys of the level of Anthony Hernandez, I think he's going to have to try to finish these guys because these guys have better decision-friendly styles rather than Pereira, who's just going to be looking to knock opponents out or at least landing enough damage for judges to score fights in their favor. With that said, I feel this is a pretty binary fight to break down. Either Pereira finishes him early, probably round 1. I think that he's going to be looking to get that body shot going, similar to what he did against Michał Oleksiejczuk. But if Hernandez has done his work, if he's done a good enough job in terms of finding ways to protect himself from being vulnerable to those types of strikes, he should be able to start wearing on Pereira here. He should find ways to get Pereira to start grappling with him and then just, feinting, or like he feints submission attempts, which gets opponents to start thinking about the submission. Then he transitions that into takedown attempts. If you can continuously do that to Pereira here, set a high pace and start slowing Pereira down, then we'll start seeing Hernandez start reaping the fruits of his labor in the second, third, and fourth rounds, which is where I fully believe he should be able to find that submission and get that win. There has been some action against Hernandez over the last couple of days. I saw Hernandez roughly around minus 165 a few days ago. Now he's down to minus 135. I get it. Pereira is dangerous, but I think his win condition is round 1. So this might be one of those spots where you want to look to live bet Hernandez going into round 2 or pre-bet. You can bet Hernandez. I think minus 135 is a very good line for him here, but also hedge with that Pereira round 1 prop. And I wouldn't go as specific as Pereira round 1 KO or Pereira round 1 sub because he's capable of doing both things after hurting his opponents, as we've been seeing in recent fights. But I still believe that Hernandez is the overall better fighter. I do think that he can get to his grind and his grappling, and I think we've seen him improve enough in terms of dealing with guys that are going to be looking to dish out that early damage and try to finish him. If he can just roll with the shots, if he can engage in the clinch enough, if he can just get Pereira working sooner than later, he will start to pull away in the second, thirds, and fourth rounds, which is where he'll likely end up getting the finish. So I'm going to go Anthony Hernandez. I'm going to go Hernandez probably by submission. I think we see him lock onto one of his front chokes and end up getting the tap here or putting Pereira out clean. But yeah, very, very fun matchup. Very excited for this. And this should definitely put one of these guys into a number 1 contender fight or close to a number 1 contender fight if they're able to get a highlight reel victory here. So give me Hernandez by sub, round 2, 3, or 4. Fluffy Hernandez. It's his era, baby. All right. There you guys go. Breakdowns for UFC Vegas 99. Appreciate all the love and support, especially everybody that's been hopping on over since the great work that we did on the Contender series this season. Greatly appreciate you guys. We cracked the 8,000 subscriber mark just a few days ago and are already closing in on 8,150. 10,000, would be great. I'm setting that goal for probably March. I'll give myself just under 5 months to try to reach 10,000 subscribers. Again, it's kind of hard unless there's something like the Contender Series or PFL or Bellator, which is usually where a lot of the subscribers come through. So anybody that hits that subscribe, if you watch this video and you haven't hit the subscribe yet, please do. It helps your boy more than you know. And that's the least you can do after I put out as much content as I do on a weekly basis for you guys. Hopefully, we're also able to deliver on some winners. Reminder, PFL breakdown coming to you guys either Thursday or Friday, but I'll also be breaking down KSW and LFA strictly on the MMALOTN Patreon page. Appreciate the love, appreciate the support. Drop a like, drop a comment, drop a subscribe, and I'll see you guys again tomorrow for probably the PFL breakdowns, but also the top 3 lock of the night and top 3 dog of the night candidates for this UFC card. All right, I'm blabbering too much. Love you guys. Appreciate you guys. Peace.